going on, guys? Junior's Fishing Company with a Royal Nymph today. So a little spin on a classic dry fly. Again, I scour the internet, images and apps and all this stuff, looking for just really cool stuff to tie. And I saw something like this. It's always cool to see a really different interpretation of, a fly that's really been tied for, 100 years. So this has some of the classic aspects with the peacock and the red body, but obviously I'm going to be fishing this in 5 to 15 feet of water, so I'm not going to be putting dry fly hackle on it, but I wanted to put something on it that might mimic legs or wings or something like that. So in the vise, I've got a size 12, just U101, just a classic long shank hook. I've tied a couple in size 10 too, but I found that the size 10s are just a little bit too long in my opinion, so I've kind of honed in on the 12s. I've got two different biots here, white and ginger. So these are just goose biots, white, ginger, just super standard run-of-the-mill. I just used just a standard peacock eye. I used the fibers kind of closer to the eye rather than down here. I don't think it really matters a ton. The thread that I used, the first couple I tied, I got sick of doing a million wraps, so I just switched to 140 red, but you could easily get away with 70. The soft hackle that I ended up using for these legs or wings or whatever is a Herbert hen saddle in medium ginger, just by whiting, and it comes with a million feathers. Great, awesome, really thin, short fibers that were perfect for something like this because I didn't want really long fibers that were going to go back to my biots or anything like that. This is a 3/16 ounce red tungsten bead. I can't remember the brand, the company or whatever, or the exact color because I just have containers of beads, but this red ended up matching really, really well with the thread. And then at the end, I just put down a little thin Solarez just to kind of even out. There was a pretty big bump between the bead and the thread, and I just kind of wanted to even that out, and it also adds a little bit of durability and a little bit of gloss to that. Put a little Royal Nymph. Like and subscribe. It's tied up. Alright, so the hook's ready. I've just got a little bit of maybe 6 wraps of .015 wire just to kind of keep that bead in place. I've got my thread down. This would just be past my barb, and it's right at the start of the bend. So I'm going to take my biots, my light brown biots, and I don't want these to be too long because this is already a really long bait. This is a long shank. So I don't want these to be too long. I want them to be about half, maybe a little bit more than the length than my shank. So I'm going to kind of cord up my thread. And biots are just tricky. I love biots, but they can just be a little bit tricky to get perfect. And I just want to rotate those just on the center as well as I can. They don't really have to be perfect. They can be as perfect as you want them to be, but that looks decent to me. Maybe a fraction of a millimeter off, I guess, on one side, but I'm going to trim these biots right to my lead. This is just going to help add a little bit of body so I don't have to do as many wraps of thread. That's the only reason I've got this 140 on. So I'm going to come back down here, and I just want to make sure when I'm wrapping like this that my thread isn't corded up. I'm going to cord and uncord this thread a bunch. So I've got 3 strands of peacock curl here. On the first one in the back, I'm just going to use 1. And then on the second, I'm going to use 2 because I want it to be a little bit bigger, and all those materials in the front end up kind of pushing that hurl down, so I got to use a little bit more. And I found that if I use 2 in the back, it ends up just being too much. Apparently you can have too much peacock curl. I never thought I'd say that, but because it's just one of those magic materials. So I'm just going to wrap this, and I just want to make sure that when I wrap this, the stem of this hurl is towards my bead head. That's kind of a very common thing to do. just so you're not pushing down your herl. But I am going to wrap over this a couple times. I want there to be enough back here where it's obvious, but not too much where it's a ridiculous amount. And I'm going to end up kind of pushing some of this back too. So I'll just get that down, a couple wraps of thread, and you can break or trim that off. So I'm going to come back here, maybe just wrap down on that, cover up my lead. And I'm going to come back here and I'm going to build this little body. Now the few that I tied, I really like a thinner body. So I'm not going to do a ton. I'm just going to do enough where, and I'm starting to cord up, so I'm going to uncord my thread. You want this to be nice and flat. And I just am going to put enough where that thread is just red because I'm wrapping over some of that herl. And I just want it, that herl kind of shows through a little bit. So I'll come right up to that, uncord my thread again, and I'm just right on that edge. I'm kind of wrapping over. I'm a little too uncurled right now, but so that's going to be enough. I'm going to come down one more time, and then I'm going to come back up, and that's going to be good. And it looks really thick now, but when I add all those other materials, it won't look as thick. So I'm going to grab my second peacock herl, and I'm right up at my bead. It really doesn't matter where you tie this in. I just want to make sure that this is all going to be sufficiently tied in. Otherwise, it doesn't really matter. I'm going to come down. Really, for me, the biggest decision is how big I want this red body to show, how long I want it to be. I'm going to end up wrapping and putting my biots and wrapping my soft hackle up right by the bead. So I just have to decide how big I want that. I can kind of do a half wrap and kind of see. I do like to have quite a bit of that red showing. To me, that's kind of the biggest attractant, is that little red body. So maybe that should be good. And I'm just going to do a bunch of wraps. And they're kind of separating on me if you just wiggle them a little bit. You can twist these too. Some of the videos I watched, they twist them. And I'm going to come right up here. Again, this looks like a ton, but once I wrap some of my stuff over these, they get pushed down pretty significantly. So now I'll grab my white biots, and I'm going to tie these in one at a time. I'm going to tie them in kind of like an X. You can tie them in at the same time. It really doesn't matter. You're going to try and get the same effect anyway. I'm going to do two things when I put this biot down. The first is I'm going to decide how long I want it, and I'm going to really want it a little bit past that back herl. And then the other thing I need to make sure to do is this should be placed right in this top center of my hook. What I find a lot, the others that I was tying, these are so slippery that they end up sliding to whichever side that you wrap on. So you really just got to be careful with these slick little things. So I'm going to kind of just look at it from the very top, and I want it just to go a little bit past that herl, and I'm going to hold it down, and I'm going to cord up my thread, and I'll give it maybe 2 wraps right there, and I can kind of see that that's not half bad, but really the tricky one is going to be the second one. And I want that to flare a little bit, so you push down a little bit. I want it to kind of come up a little. I'm going to grab my second one, and again, this just has to be the same length as the first, but you can put it in long and then just pull it back if you need to. It's a little bit trickier if you put it in shorter and have to pull the other way. So I'll come right around there and just give it good tension, and then I can kind of just play with these. It's up to you on how wide you want these to flare out. I kind of want them to flare quite a bit. So again, the goal is just to get it right on the bead, and it's not perfect, but that's alright. So I'm going to kind of just hold this with my finger and give it some good tension. And again, these are super slick, so I can still separate these a little And what I'm going to do is I'm going to give it a couple wraps there, and then I'm going to come behind and I'm going to trim these, not necessarily as close as I can. I want just a little bit left over right at the top, because I'm going to end up wrapping these back and pushing down on them just to hold them. And then that should kind of lock them in pretty good. Cord up my thread so it hits it. I'm just going to push those down just so they stay where I want them. So now you can see I've already pushed down quite a bit of that herl. I'm going to take my little hen saddle feather, or my 4B, whatever you want to call it, and I'm going to cord my thread up, because I'm going to just put this little tip of the feather right by my bead, and I want to make sure that I cinch that down well, because they're slippery, and it's just frustrating when you're trying to wrap something and it pops out. So just trim that as well as you can. You'll end up covering a good amount in thread. So I'm just going to turn this once, and you can try and preen these back a little bit, but you really don't have to worry too much because it's not a ton of soft hackle anyway. I'm just going to turn one time, and it wants to come that way, but these fibers really are flexible, so you can just push them back. Then I'll come right up to the front, and I'm going to tie that off. Just one wrap. That's all I need. I'm going to cord up my thread. Again, I've said that a bunch, but that just makes it so you can wrap. I'm going to get one more. Right exactly where you want, because this 140, when it opens up, can be a little bit tricky to listen. So I'm going to get that pushed back, get all of these pushed back as much as I can, and then I'm going to end up trimming some of these anyway. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to end up just trimming the fibers right by my biots, because I want those biots to show. So I'm just going to come in here and trim the ones right by my biots. So really what I can do is I can come here and I can whip finish, and I'm starting to build up a lot of thread, but that's alright. So the last thing I'm going to do, I'm going to add some Solarez thin, just to kind of even out this thread and my bead. It'll add some gloss, it'll kind of magnify that red head, and I just think it looks a little bit more clean. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to get that right on the edge, and I'm just going to kind of rotate this and put even pressure on my bottle just to spread it out evenly. And I can spread this out. This isn't like super runny. It's not like the bone dry where it would be running all over. I'm just going to put that right up to my soft hackle, and then push it a little bit up on the bead, and I'll end up adding another layer to this. But it's just to add a little bit of, I just love UV resin. I don't know what people did before. Just to add, it kind of evens out that. You can kind of see that it evens it out a little bit. So I'm going to cook that, and this stuff cures really quick, and it's not like a super thick layer or anything where you have to cook it for an hour. So there you have it, a Royal Wolf Nymph. I'm really excited to use this. It's a pretty cool pattern. I watched a bunch of videos on people tying the dry fly, and just to put a little spin on it in a way that I'm going to be able to fish it. Not exactly sure what it's supposed to mimic, but just an attractor, really bright red. Junior's Fishing Company. Like and subscribe. See you in the next one.